If you're in Idaho and over the last couple of weeks you've been treated to a whole series of stories about the political process that's taking place right now during the legislative session in Boise, and really it's like going to a NASCAR race and you can't turn your eyes away from an accident when it happens. I think for a lot of people on the other side of the aisle, there's a little bit of bemusement about what's going on, but it raises an interesting question. If the situation were reversed in the state legislature and the Democrats happen to be in control, exactly what would be we be hearing about when it comes to legislation and about various issues? We're joined this morning during the first 40 minutes of the program, or at least this hour, by Matt Erpelding. He is the House Minority Leader, leader of the Democrats in the State House of Representatives in Boise. And first of all, sir, welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me, Bill. I'm real excited to be on.
Yeah, it's good once in a while to hear from somebody else who has an opinion other than mine. I realize it's not the only one out there.
Well,
Uh,
I think you and I'll find we're probably pretty close together at times.
well, and that's an interesting point to bring up because I know sometimes there are pieces of legislation that come along and everybody likes them, just as there are times when legislation comes along. Raul Labrador said it last week about the health care bill in Washington that it had no natural constituency. Nobody liked it. And
Right.
so there are times when everybody's united either in that way. Doesn't happen often, but I think it's an interesting question. If tomorrow the Democrats suddenly woke up and found that they had the majority, what would be different with, I guess, just various bills that would be worked in Boise?
Well, geez, that's a tough question because we don't often think of ourselves as king for a day. But if tomorrow the situation had changed, I think the very first thing we'd focus on is total tax reform, lowering the overall tax burden on Idahoans, but doing it in a much different way than our Republican colleagues who pretty much just shoot for the top. You have a lot of Idahoans that have, a taxable, even if they make $90,000 gross in their paycheck, by the time it gets to Idaho taxable income, it's right around 60 grand or 50 grand, and finding ways to really lower the burden by changing the way the progressive tax bracket is for folks who have a taxable income between $20,000 to $90,000, lowering that while continuing to maintain a revenue stream on the upper brackets for people who have a taxable income of $250,000 or more would be the first thing that we would do. We would also look at how do you eliminate exemptions, all of these ridiculous exemptions on sales tax, because if we could figure out how to eliminate those exemptions for all these special interest groups that our colleagues on the other side have passed over the years, once we eliminate that, we actually could lower the sales tax rate probably to 5% or maybe even lower. So that would be the first thing that we would do, would be take a really systematic look at how best to create a broader base and a more fair and appropriate tax system for the working folks in Idaho. I think the second thing that we would do, really very probably right around the same time, is we would look at what is the best way to fund roads in Idaho. And I'll tell you that what they're looking at right now on the other side of the aisle is about $300 million in debt. And they like to joke that it's a balanced budget state, but if you look at the way they want to bond on future federal maintenance dollars in order to expand and improve roads in the Treasure Valley, it seems to me that that money, we should be finding ways to send money to the local highway districts, the local counties, to improve local roads. And if we're going to expand roads, we need to find a way to pay for it. And at a minimum, we need to have a plan for how to take on the maintenance costs of those new roads when we take it on. And I'll tell you that $300 million in debt and deficit spending may seem like a deal that's too good to be true, but it would be like you asking me to take a pay cut and then buy a $400,000 house. That doesn't make any sense.
You referenced sales tax, and I know that on the other side of the aisle, there's an internal struggle going on over the sales tax on groceries. And I saw a map posted on Facebook the other day. Idaho's only about one of, I think, 7 or 8 states nationwide that actually has a sales tax on groceries. And some states actually have it on some groceries, but not on other groceries. The governor obviously doesn't want to see it go away. We all understand we need some operating budget, but if you eliminate it, how do you replace that revenue stream?
That's an incredible question, because the argument is, should we cut taxes irresponsibly for the top 10% of Idaho and cut their taxes by $1,500 a year, or should we do something for everyone in Idaho? And then comes in the grocery tax. The coalition that passed the grocery tax out of the Idaho Senate was a coalition of Democrats and hard right or conservatives coming out of the Senate, and it was really in response to a backroom deal that had been cut by the establishment Republicans, done in private. And then when it was unveiled, they acted like they had this brilliant idea, and basically what they were doing was a giveaway to the most wealthy Idahoans. So I'm really proud of the Senate Democrats for having stood up against that type of leadership with the conservatives and voting for the grocery tax. Now, you're exactly right. Governor Otter has a concern that it's a fairly substantial hit to the general fund. When you factor in removing the grocery tax credit and you take out some of the definitions of groceries, it's probably a $50 million hit to the general fund. But I think the question is, what the establishment Republicans initially were proposing was a $60 million income tax cut for the wealthiest Idahoans. And folks like me who, when it's all said and done and I take out my homeowner's exemption and, I take out a little bit of student loan debt as a tax deduction. When it's all said and done, I've got a taxable income of $50,000, and I would have gotten $30, which isn't even enough to fill my friggin' Subaru with gas. So, it was really an interesting discussion to have. If we're going to cut taxes, and this is about cutting taxes, then which is the best one? My feeling is, if we're going to cut taxes, grocery tax is the best one right now. The larger question is, how does that impact our ability to fund things like roads, schools, our mental health problems we have in some of the areas of Idaho? That's a more broad question that if I were king for a day, we might be having a different discussion, because first we would totally redo the tax brackets so that those of us that are in the middle class would actually get a break, and those people who have benefited from our work would continue to help support our infrastructure. And we would probably have a conversation about how are we going to fund our infrastructure.
Our guest during this segment of the program, Matt Erpelding, he's joining us from Boise. He is the leader of the House Democrats. That is the minority, of course, in Boise. We're discussing some of the things that would happen, perhaps, if Democrats had a larger voice in this process. One of the things that I think that probably people tend to sometimes miss, and you may not have a lot in common with people like Heather Scott, but her opposition to the grocery tax is that her constituency in places like Bonners Ferry isn't necessarily, they're not a wealthy group of people. And those of you who are representing some urban districts or more urbanized districts, you may be faced with the same constituency. You've got people who aren't, they're not rolling in dough, if you will. Is it possible you could work with people like her?
We look for opportunities to work with either the conservative faction or the establishment faction of the Republican Party. Honestly, I share a lot of the concerns that the conservatives have about a lack of transparency in government, a lack of openness and voices at the table. It's reasonable to have the conservative voices at the table. It's also reasonable to have the Democratic Party at the table. And the establishment, they have done a phenomenal job of cutting anybody out of the loop that they don't agree with and ensuring that they're able to hold on to their power and their influence simply by silencing others. I don't always agree with, Representative Scott's tactics on the ground, how to do that. In large part because I think that if you're going to do that and you're going to build a coalition, you need to have a quality level of communication. I don't always think that that's present, but I commiserate with them. They work really hard for their issues. I rarely vote with them, but there are times when we are on the same page, and we are on the same page not because we agree on policy, but we agree that there is a lack of transparent process in the legislature.
We're at 8:16, and I've got 40 and a little bit of rain falling in the Magic Valley this morning. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our guest, Matt Erpelding, and, of course, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. If If there is sometimes agreement on some of these issues about transparency and about taxation, I guess the big divide still is, though, with Republicans and a lot of the Democrats in your caucus is on some of the social issues, which have been this session relatively quiet.
They really have. Yeah. Which is always nice for me because I really think that when government gets into social issues, government begins to control what's happening in people's private lives. And, I'm a Democrat simply because I believe in the value of our communities and the value of investing in our communities. But boy, do I have some libertarian streaks in me. And I'll tell you, if there's one thing that I do not like, it's government telling me what to do and when to do it.
That conservative, in fact, caucus, I think among the Republicans seem to have that same libertarian streak to a point. I don't know that it's completely the same as yours, but to the point they have it's that notion that people should leave me alone.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. I was raised by a working mom who worked really hard and was a breadwinner in the house, and she was a hardcore Catholic. She was also a strong believer in women's rights, and she also believed that that um, separation of church and state was essential, and that's coming from a little guy who was an altar boy until he was 14 years old, and she really impressed that upon me. And so where we deviate on social issues often has to do with that piece, the separation of church and state. And that can be a really difficult conversation for folks to have, but it really is embedded in our doctrine of our government and our country. It's in the very First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and I believe with every fiber of my body that that's a really important piece.
There, we've got about a minute before we get to the break, but we want to get back to, if we could, a little bit on this transportation issue. I've done some driving just out of curiosity. Decided over the last few weekends to travel not necessarily back roads, but some of the, if not the interstate, at least some of those secondary roads. Not only here in the southern part of Idaho, but I've been up to Sun Valley just to see what things are like. I know that group of legislators from Caldwell County, I read over the weekend, that they are desperately looking for ways to fix the interstate through the county. And if it doesn't get done, there's some severe road hazards out there. Is
Yeah, there is.
anybody really understanding? I think in the overall picture that we've got to do something, and that we just can't sit back and let this go because I'll tell you, a lot of commerce is simply going to die.
Oh, Bill, it's pretty unbelievable how many of us recognize that we've got to do something about our roads issue in Idaho. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in about 1999 or 2000, the state of Idaho took out a $40 million loan on a prison that we still pay $5 million a year for. And we are now coming up on, 10, 15 years, 16 years after we built that prison, and we're paying $5 million a year to service the debt on that prison inside of our general fund. We put
Well,
forward a bill this year to pay off that debt and free $5 million a year in order to push that into any program that we needed, but we were thinking transportation.
well,
Now,
hold
the
that
folks
thought.
from Caldwell,
Hold
they're
that
an
thought for
interesting
just a
bunch.
moment, Representative. Hold that thought. We've got a break I've got to take, but we'll get back to that. We'll pick it up in just a couple of minutes. Representative Matt Erpelding joining us on air this morning, and he's the leader of the House Democrats in Boise. We've got more on the way in just a couple of minutes. It's 8:20, and we're at 39. You're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We'll get to our guest in just a moment again. We're joined this morning by State Representative Matt Erpelding, and he's the leader of the House Democrats in Boise. Just a quick note, I wanted to mention for those folks who, like me, are getting really close to that day when we're going to be retiring. I wanted to point out, if you haven't gotten a plan put together yet, you might want to give a visit to the folks at Waddell and Reed here in Twin Falls. They've been in the business of looking out for money since 1937, one of the oldest firms offering mutual funds in the country. In fact, Waddell and Reed owns and manages two mutual fund families, and they invest by a conservative nature. And you have to question whether they know what they're doing. They've been in business for 8 decades. That's a pretty good sign of success. They'll take a planning approach while working with you on your individual needs and goals and help build proper expectations. At Waddell and Reed, they help people manage money, and Waddell and Reed takes planning personally. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Representative, you were just mentioning the size of some of the debt service we have in the state that perhaps the public really isn't aware of, and tying that into some of the road proposals that we have.
Right. Yeah, and I had just said, Democrats were the only ones that proposed a piece of legislation to pay off this remaining debt for this prison, which is, a ridiculous amount of money that's being spent out of the general fund. But now you've got the Caldwell folks whose road has finally taken a turn for the worst after they've rejected, fee bills. They've rejected ways to come up with new funding for our roads. And now they're saying, we need it so badly, we want you to take out $300 million in debt in order to pay off our roads. And when you say, well, we kind of need a plan to maintain those roads once we've built those roads, you start to see votes falling off because nobody wants to, step forward and actually pay for what they have, or they're afraid that they'll not get elected. But, governance is about making hard decisions. And when you don't have the money at home, you don't just take out another huge debt. That's a classic way to get yourself into a bankruptcy problem. And so we have a really hard decision because not only do we need to take care of our interstate, which is state highway dollars, but if you're in Cassia County or you're in Twin Falls County or in Gooding County, your local roads took a beating this year because of the weather. And quite frankly, there's not enough money. And so the conversation that we're having right now is, well, we need to fix the interstate, but I feel like we've left the locals in the lurch. And it looks to me like that may be the plan this session.
I know that one area of agreement some conservatives have with the Democrats is that a lot of the decisions that are made when it comes to budgeting come down from. I have one of my coworkers. She came from a family of very staunch Democrats. They still have the old Christmas cards President Kennedy used to send to the family. She's probably today much more of a Republican voter, but she tends to tell me when I have a conversation with her that agribusiness has such a strong hold on the legislature that it essentially dictates a lot of these choices. And agribusiness obviously wants good roads too, so you can get goods to market and the like, but that agribusiness doesn't necessarily want to foot the bill, so we have borrowing that goes on. Is that a good way to put that?
No, I probably wouldn't put it on agribusiness. You guys have, we have such an incredible economy, particularly in Twin Falls, that starts with the raw products that are grown, whether it be beef or sugar beets or, dairy cattlemen. I mean, all these guys out there are working so hard and they're barely making ends meet half the time, and then they get it to Chobani or Cliff Bar or, Glambia and all these places where you have an advancement. Now, where there is conflict in terms of how to pay for things, it's when a group refuses to address that urban communities have a need as well as rural communities. That's where we run into problems. I'll tell you right now, I'm of the opinion that for Boise to survive, I need every single rural community in Idaho to be thriving. And I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is and invest in rural communities. And I think that most of, if not all of, the minority caucus is at that place. There are times, though, when we really need our rural counterparts to say, you know what, what's happening in these urban communities, we don't understand what's going on over there. And so rather than just blocking what they're trying to do, maybe we're going to come to the table and try to have a conversation about how can we both impact the rural communities positively, how can we ensure their success, how can we ensure that our agribusinesses continues to succeed and do well for Idaho, but also what's it going to take to make sure that our urban communities continue to grow and thrive. That type of conversation does not take place when the establishment leaders are running the show, because they do everything behind closed doors. I guarantee that a few of the conservatives, I could sit down with them and have a conversation about, this is what the urban communities need. Tell me about your communities, some of your areas that are maybe a little more economically displaced. What can we do to help? We may not come to consensus, but I'll tell you what, we're going to do everything we can to help one another's districts out. That's just the way that I think Idahoans are. That's an Idaho value that I believe we've lost over the years as we've increasingly come in conflict between rural and urban communities.
Our guest is Matt Erpelding, and he is the House Minority Leader in Boise. We're at 827. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And we're at 40 with some light rain falling in various areas. A lot of the caricature of the Democrats is that they would just simply always tax the rich more to pay for all of the expenses. On the other hand, we're a state with just, to my knowledge, one billionaire, and there really may not be that much in the way of wealth to tax. Am I right on that?
Oh, Idaho's got some wealth, but I don't think and that is a characterization of the Democrats that's, in my opinion, in Idaho, false. That wasn't Governor Anders's approach. That wasn't Governor Evans' approach. So I can't think of a Idaho Democrat who has worked really hard in this state who actually believes what you just said. Now, we get sucked into the national media and the mainstream media, and then what you see is a polarization of ideals that are inaccurate. They are polarizing. They make people angry, and that sells advertising. So that's a really big disappointment to me. And that's not really what we need to be doing. We want to lower the rates, broaden the base. We want to make sure that folks who are in the middle class, the folks that are working at the sugar beet factory and are working super hard, or the folks that are out working on in the dairy industry and are working really hard and are trying to get ahead. We want to make sure that they're taken care of, that their schools are taken care of, that their roads don't have potholes that blow out their front shocks when they're trying to get to work. And the way that you do that is not by saying we're going to go after this, billionaire, whoever you're referencing there. The way you get at it is you say, what's the most fair and what's the most appropriate taxing system that we could come up with in Idaho? And I'll tell you what, it isn't by raising anything. It's by equalizing things and getting rid of exemptions, because I'll tell you there are a lot of people who benefit from the relationships that my establishment friends have come up with.
We've got about 5 minutes left. We have to take a short break. We're speaking with State Representative Matt Erpelding, who's also the House Minority Leader in Boise. And he'll spend a few more minutes with us. Also, Randy Staples, about 15 minutes away, 10, 15 minutes away from Idaho Weekly Briefing. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 40, and probably not a really big warm-up on the way today. We'll pick up our conversation with State Representative and House Minority Leader Matt Erpelding in just a moment. It's 8:33. We're at 40. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I'm very selfish when I come to work every day, realizing that I want you to have good hearing so you can hear our program. If you're having difficulty hearing, I want to recommend Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. There are many choices you do have available for hearing health care. So why would you choose Mount Harrison Audiology? Independence. Mount Harrison Audiology is the only independent, locally owned hearing healthcare practice in southern Idaho. That means more choices for treatment than just one brand and lower cost. Trust your hearing to a certified audiologist. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology for your appointment today. The number 312-0957. That's 312-0957. Mr. Minority Leader, that's a conversation we were having just before the break. What's it costing the legislature to have this extension? Things were supposed to be wrapped up last week. What's the day-by-day cost? Does anybody have a figure?
The estimates actually are somewhere between $30,000 and $35,000. So what we've gotten from LSO is that it's about $30,000 to $35,000 per day that we stay here, and so this conservative establishment, fist fight that we're watching is costing taxpayers a significant amount of money. And because they're really having difficulty saying, we both realize that we need to pay for our roads, and maybe we need to have some maintenance plans for it, they really can't move anywhere, because all they keep circling back to is the easy way to fix things, which is take out a bunch of debt.
I was going to say, from your side of the room, when you're watching this go on, and it's not illegal, obviously. It's people can make certain parliamentary moves, and these things can take place. But is there a sense, as you're watching this unfold, that that the other side, there's an opportunity for an advantage for Democrats?
Oh, absolutely. Politics is all about the art of the deal, right? And I will argue that that was made in the last presidential election, and what we saw on Friday was that they really have trouble doing that. But on multiple occasions this year, we have been the group of reasonable, responsible people in the room that have had to cut a deal with either the conservative bloc or the moderates in order to move the state of Idaho forward. And we've done that multiple times. We'll continue to do that. We'll continue to keep our channels of communication with both sides. And then we're in a really lucky position. It's not our fight. They can go have their fight all day, and if they want to have it boil over into the media and make themselves look petty, then let them do that. But what we're going to do is focus on getting the business of Idaho done so we can get out of here.
The insurgents, I guess that's one way to describe them in the Republican Party. I don't gather that many of them are looking to advance to higher offices, but some of the people, obviously, in the more established wing of that caucus certainly are. Over on your side, your name gets bandied about periodically about a higher office, and I've heard your name mentioned a number of times for statewide offices. Anything on the horizon you can tell us about today?
No, no. You know, I'm 42 years old, and my wife and I have only been married for a couple years, and I'm not ready for anything like that. I appreciate that my name gets bantered around, but, you know, the other thing I will say is you may speculate that those insurgents don't have statewide goals, but I would argue that every one of them probably has some statewide ambition. You know, the other side is a very ambitious, very cutthroat, and they're very into either keeping or consolidating power. And I don't think that, you know, obviously I don't think single party rule is a good thing for Idaho. I think that the way that we found success in Idaho is by coming to the middle and finding middle of the road solutions. And so I think that we will continue to see infighting and primaries between the conservatives and the establishment, and I think it's only going to get nastier.
Well, I made an observation. Priscilla Giddings was on the show with us a couple of weeks ago that if there's a rising star that's coming out of that particular caucus, that, as Randy Staples has called them, a maverick wing of the party, it might be her. And I don't know that she has given it much thought yet because she's relatively new to the legislature. But it does seem that some of these people, just by name recognition, they're building it fast.
Yeah, I would agree that there's name recognition. You know, Priscilla and I have a great relationship. I don't know if you've interviewed her lately, but her and I were the top two in the steps for schools, and she beat me by actually 3,000 steps. And the two of us did 800,000 steps. I did 821,000. I think she did 827,000 steps in the month of February. That constitutes like 400 miles of walking or running. Both of us were running, trying to beat one another. And I'll tell you what, I think that shows where she's at. She's talented, she's strong, and she's smart. And so your assessment, and while I don't agree with her on major policy issues because I think she's too hard line and too far right, and I think that far rightness will actually harm Idaho in the long run, there is no doubt that she has the potential to be an influential politician in Idaho.
Well, Representative, we got to wrap things up today, but I do hope that we can chat sometime again soon.
Absolutely. I would welcome the opportunity, and please let me know if you have a topic you want to discuss. I'm happy to come on.
Well, good luck, and hopefully you all get home soon.
Yeah, you know, I was hoping it was Friday, and now I'm hoping it's tomorrow afternoon, but you know what they say about hope. So we're going to get it done and get out of here.
Well, we want to thank you again, and we're coming up on 8:40. Randy Staples is on the way in just a few minutes.